Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me on this fun podcast. I think it's fun. It's called When I'm High. And this episode is the very first episode of a brand new interview. All the other ones you've heard were pre-recorded, pre-edited, bunch of people talking in one episode. But here we have today, I'm just going to let him introduce himself. Abdullah, tell the people who you are.
Hey, I'm Abdullah Saeed, and I'm a TV producer and screenwriter, and I've made a whole bunch of cannabis media.
And one of those pieces of media is actually how I found out about you. It's your podcast called Great Moments in Weed History. Do I have that right?
Yes, that's right. That's right, Spencer.
Everybody should go listen to this podcast. They go through history, old history, new history, and they're all great moments in weed history. Oh, and I can sort of hear you guys say that in my head when I even say it because I've listened to every single episode.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing this. I know your time is short, so we are going to get into the questions. First, I would love you to just tell me one of your favorite stories in your personal life related to weed.
Right. Wow. There's so many. My life has definitely been very cannabis involved for a long time. I certainly smoked a lot of cannabis as a teenager and very quickly became, enamored with the politics and history around cannabis because there's just, the more you learn, the less you know. To pick an individual moment. What was the prompt again? Like just one that stands out or something like positive?
Yeah, just the first one that comes to mind. Doesn't have to be your favorite or anything, just anything.
Right, sure. I guess my first dab was definitely interesting because I'd been smoking weed for several years at that point. I'd been smoking weed for probably, 12 years or something, right? And you never really get as high as you got when you were a teenager. And I remember taking my first dab. It was with a subject who I ended up filming with. I did a Vice documentary called Intro to BHO. And it was actually the very first Weedicate video on Vice. And yeah, I just remember getting so stoned and was like, oh my God. Like, I did not think I would be able to recapture this level of being high. So shout out Rabbit, which is the code name of the fellow that gave me my first dab.
Nice. Yeah, I've heard that's what dabs are like. It's like sort of becoming a virgin again. I'm like, oh, this is what it's been like. This is the high that I've been chasing all these years.
It's true.
Nice. All right, well, we are going to get right into the meat of this after that great story. I'm sure there's a lot more involved in that story, so we'll save that for another time. In a very high level general sense, because we're going to get into some specifics after this, but in a high level, pun intended, what does it feel like to be high?
So I would say there are three components to what it feels like to be high, right? One of them is a sort of like a euphoria, right? You feel joy, I think, very basically. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are like, no, like I call that like extreme paranoia or whatever, right? But I think that, if you use cannabis correctly, you feel a lot of joy. Like, you actually feel happy and you feel excited about stuff. Like I smoke weed when I write a lot and I get excited about the things that I'm writing. Very often I'll get excited about what I'm eating more if I'm stoned, right? So I think there's that basic excitement. There's like a body high, right? I think there's a sort of mellowness or looseness that you get. Now we're discovering that cannabinoids have different anti-inflammatory effects. So, like it's no surprise that when you smoke weed, you feel a little bit looser in your body, right? And then there's the psychological connectivity, and this is something you experience in more extreme forms, I think, on some psychedelics. But the idea that there is a general connectivity, you start to see connections in things that you didn't before. You start to recognize patterns that you didn't before. So that's how, if I had to break it down scientifically, which I guess we don't, but if I did, that's how I would say it.
Yeah, I like that, especially the thing about seeing connections, noticing connections. Yeah, that's and I think, if I understand correctly, that there are literal connections between your neurons in your brain actually being made that maybe weren't there before.
Yeah, there's certainly a sort of rewiring. I'm not a scientist, but I've definitely read read some documentation on how cannabis affects your brain synapses, right? Synapses, however that's pronounced. But yeah, and that, cannabis is used for PTSD, for, people with psychological or emotional trauma. So, we're learning more and more. Of course, cannabis was banned for study through our greatest period of scientific discovery. So, of course, there's so many things that we're just learning now. But yeah, one of them is that it has an effect on your brain. I mean, look, the NFL is talking about allowing players to smoke cannabis. Now, this is something I was reporting about back in like 2013, 2014, is that, the NFL should allow cannabis because, in fact, it'll alleviate the potential brain injury that, is amounting to a whole litany of lawsuits against the league for allowing, such violent gameplay and pumping people up with, painkillers and sending them back into the game. Like, cannabis is the answer, and the world's finally discovering that.
Yeah, it's definitely a start. That'll be really interesting to see where that goes over the next few years, especially as states start to legalize it more and more.
Yeah.
Well, so you mentioned food a little bit ago.
Yeah.
Can you tell me how is food different? What's your experience of food like when you're high? And you can also talk about the munchies if that's something that you experience as well.
Right. So I, definitely occasionally get the munchies, but it's not one of my immediate reactions when I get high. I don't really plan to smoke before I eat, very often. Usually I just kind of maintain a baseline stonedness throughout the day, and I think it does help my appetite. I definitely have moments where I snack. That usually happens late at night, where I'll eat a bunch of garbage. And certainly when I was younger, I would succumb to the munchies, right? I mean, the thing that comes to mind is in New Jersey, you could get stuff off the 99-cent value meal at Wendy's. And it was 99 cents. With tax, it would come to $1.05. So if you get 4 things, how much does that cost? $4.20. And of course, that was like the thing, for $4.20, you get a burger and a nuggets and a fries and a drink. And, who knows, like, what grade F meat. Perhaps Wendy's is slightly better than some other options. But, yeah, so, but I also, worked a lot with cannabis-infused food on the show that I produced and hosted, Bon Appetit. And yeah, I mean, I think that also is an interesting intersection of food and cannabis, because really what you start to realize, and this is kind of the thesis of much of my work in drug journalism, right, is that the lines that we have drawn between food, drugs, and medicine are imaginary, right? Like all the other lines that we've drawn, essentially. But these are the lines that concern me, right? If you look at something like the United States federal schedule for illegal drugs, it's like literally like it's upside down. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's based on bullshit. The most dangerous drugs are ranked low, and the least dangerous drugs are ranked high. MDMA, cannabis, psilocybin, LSD, which are now starting to be used as, therapeutic medicines for people with psychological and emotional issues. Those are, I mean, and then the drugs that are killing people, pseudo opioids and whatnot, they're like lower down on the schedule. They're like in 3 or 4. Like I don't know. That's just kind of. I'm sorry, I lost track of your original question.
No, that's fine. I can bring it back because we were talking about food and what you said about how the schedules of drugs are kind of upside down. That's actually very related to food, because this is definitely not a rabbit hole I'm going to get down right now, but the government subsidizes the industries that are unhealthy for us, meat and dairy. We know scientifically that stuff is unhealthy. They subsidize the healthy industries a little bit, but it's nowhere near as much. And that is completely backwards. They are making it easier and cheaper for us to get the unhealthy foods to make us unhealthy, but it's the other foods that we are being pushed away from because it's the healthy foods that we are being pushed away from because they are more expensive than they should be.
Man, you are speaking my language, Spencer. And that's very interesting. I'm definitely going to look into it. You said dairy and wheat, right? Because
meat.
Like and meat.
Beef.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seriously, man. Yeah, meat is. That's the thing. I grew up in Thailand in a Pakistani family. Meat is very important to me. I in the beginning of my career, I was very inspired by eating pork. But as I get older, I realize that, oh my God, this is one of the most destructive things that we do on this fucking planet is the meat industry. Yeah.
Well, nobody wants to hear us talk about that anymore. You and I can talk about that more later. It's definitely something I think a lot about. So, back to cannabis, and what does it feel like? What is your sense of time like when you get high?
My sense of time fluctuates based on so many other factors that it's really hard to say. I remember when I was younger that, you would start playing video games and you'd think 5 minutes have gone by, but you step outside and it's dark out or something like that. Like that would definitely happen. I don't think it slows it down very often. I mean, I've definitely been in situations, let's just say it fits with the time flies when you're having fun thing. Like if you're stoned and you're having a good time, the minutes just fly by. But if you're stoned and you're like stuck somewhere, like this is a thing I never understood, being stoned in school. I was only stoned in school a couple times because I was like, I don't want to waste my weed being stoned in school, because you sit in a classroom and the clock seems to go backwards, right? And you're like, oh my God. It sort of accentuates what you would be feeling normally. And I think that's a good way to describe it all around, is everything is heightened, right? Everything is like, if you see a person, that looks funny to you, they're going to look even funnier. And if they look scary to you, they're going to look even scarier or whatever. You know what I mean?
There's definitely that enhancement. So sort of on the same level, how does your level of focus change?
Right. I think that's an interesting point. I think that I tell myself that I'm much more focused when I'm stoned, but in fact that I can be unfocused, but even my unfocused time when I'm stoned is productive in a sense. And what I mean by that is a big part of writing, especially in the, narrative space, is digesting the ideas and sort of thinking. And you only actually spend 10% of that time writing. And that gestation period is much more efficient when you're stoned, I think, right? And then also I would say it depends on the kind of weed. Like, I'm actually out of sativa weed right now, but my general blend is 1/3 OG, 1/3 CBD flower, 1/3 sativa flower, right? And usually I'm gifted sativa flower. I don't really seek it out and buy it in bulk or anything like that. I smoke gas, right? Like gas is the thing that I smoke all day. But at night I mix gas, so like OG or sour stuff, or birthday cakes or, cookies or things like that. I'll mix with, some hash, bubble hash, things like that. And maybe purple weed if I have purple weed on hand. Again, not something I buy in bulk, but something that I generally like to have around. So yeah, it definitely depends on the weed. I have kind of found my balance. I quit smoking cigarettes about I don't know, almost a year ago at this point, and
Good
have
for
taken
you.
up. Thank you. I'm very proud of it. I smoked for like over 20 years. It's a
Yeah.
long time. And I drink coffee now, and I drink cold brew, and I make like honey simple syrup, and I drink it with oat milk. And the balance between the weed and the coffee, that's a really nice balanced high. And not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I used to mix my weed with tobacco almost every time that I smoked. I smoked spliffs for many, many years. And at some point, I remember being at my place in New York and having weed but not having tobacco and being disappointed that, oh, I only have weed. And I was like, that's fucked up priorities, right?
Right.
And so the combination of tobacco and weed is nice when you're talking about just the high. That augmentation is not worth the smoking of tobacco, which makes you feel like shit in many other ways. Being high is better and cleaner when you don't smoke any tobacco at all. So for anyone listening who smokes tobacco and weed, your high will be cleaner and, purer in some ways if you don't smoke tobacco, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I would recommend everybody just quit tobacco altogether.
Yeah.
So in terms of focus, it sort of depends, it sounds like. But on a similar level of focus, because you are a creative person, especially in like writing, how does creativity change? This is a huge question when it comes to cannabis.
Yeah.
People say it makes you more creative. Some people say it doesn't matter. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that it goes back to those connections. You make the connections that wouldn't necessarily be there. And for me, it's just a part of it. And it's also like I enjoy myself more when I'm smoking weed, when I'm free to smoke weed, right? So in that, there's a lot of freedom. I think I can definitely, like we're saying, it accentuates your, your thoughts and feelings as much as it does your senses, right? So it's like if you're focused or if you're enjoying it, like, if I'm sitting here working and I'm like enjoying a script I'm writing, right? Like I will enjoy it more if I'm stoned. Like it just consistently happens that way, right? I don't know how there's all these like, legendary writers and poets and shit who like drank. I'm like, how do you drink and write? That doesn't sound doable at all to me. You know what I mean? But it definitely like, yeah, it's really hard to say specifically what it does. Like it doesn't make. Here's what I'll say: if you are a person that doesn't have good ideas, you can smoke all the weed in the world. It's not gonna help you, right? But if you have ideas and you have some technical skill for the medium that you're using, it can really propel you forward. I think it can really and just make the process enjoyable, so that when you're done with it, you're not like, oh fuck, thank God that's done. You're like, I can't wait to do the next one. Because like I love it. I was just thinking this earlier. I was writing earlier, and I procrastinate all the time, do stuff around the house or whatever. So until noon today, I was just doing shit around the house. But then I sat down to write, and I got stoned, and I wrote for an hour, right? And that hour was so much better, right? Because I'm not putting pressure on myself. I'm allowing myself time to chill. I could have sat myself down at 9 a.m., and started writing and pushed myself to do it, right? And it's not going to create the same, the same product. It's just not going to be as good. Like, I have to get stoned and enjoy my day, and then it comes out easy,
Yeah, you had gotten the things done beforehand, so you didn't really have that over your head. Have you ever done something, written something while high, and then looked at it later? And is it good? Is it bad? Is it the same? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, definitely when I was like young, I remember, like 16, 17, I remember visiting my brother at college and being very stoned and trying to like write down what I was experiencing, and it was like I looked at it later and it's just like the dumbest thing, It's like a drawing. It's like a diagram or whatever. Right. But like, but later in life, I mean, smoking weed is such a regular part of my daily life that it's never, like if I'm writing something, it's not, I don't think it's any different. I guess that's really hard to say because I haven't written anything not stoned in like a really long time.
True.
You know what I mean? Like, so when I look at, any of my writing, I mean, it was written when I was stoned and some of it's good. I like to think that all of it's pretty good, but that some of it's real good, hopefully, right?
Yeah. And it's an interesting experiment, maybe to try to write something not stoned and see, is it going to come out better? Is it going to be easier? But if you're so used to doing it one way, then and it works. No, so no need to change.
I need to maintain my confidence and not start. I don't want to go down the road of realizing that I'm actually a shitty writer unless I'm stoned.
I have a feeling if you're doing it as you're living, I think you're probably a good writer. So no worries there. No worries.
Hopefully, yeah.
So how is your memory affected while high? I think that's a big stereotypical thing that people mention. Oh, you're forgetful. How is it for you?
Yeah. So you know what? I mean, we're definitely talking about one of the sacrifices in some ways. Is that my short-term memory is kind of bad sometimes, right? Now, sometimes I remember a lot of shit. You know what I mean? Like I remember entire movies. I mean, I'm sure maybe you have the same skill, but I can recite all of Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls from heart, right? But like, I definitely have some issues with memory. My girlfriend will give me shit about it sometimes and be like, oh, like, how do you not remember this or that, right? So it absolutely has an impact. There's a concept called memory extinction. So the guy who first isolated THC, Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, who's an Israeli researcher, cannabis pioneer, he studied something called memory extinction, which is the basis for this, cannabis as a treatment for PTSD, because it sort of helps you dissociate emotions from your memories. So that is definitely, I was injured traumatically a couple times, when I was in my 20s, and cannabis really helped me with coping with, the post-trauma of that. I was diagnosed with PTSD. So, I mean, that is definitely, in some ways it's affected my memory in a trivial way, negatively, but in a very substantial way, very positively, because I don't think I would be the person that I am today if I didn't regain my confidence after, those instances, and cannabis really helped me do that.
That's an amazing story. I honestly don't know if I've ever spoken to anybody directly who has had cannabis help their PTSD. I know that's one of the conditions in Illinois that I think that they did add eventually. I know Illinois was really strict on their medical conditions, but that's a huge one that people really do need help with. Yeah,
absolutely. And I've reported on this topic. I've interviewed veterans, and if anyone deserves the right to use cannabis medically, it's veterans. It's people who have voluntarily put themselves in harm's way, and a lot of veterans say that cannabis helps them with their PTSD more than the psychotropics prescribed to them. And I think the VA has sort of eased their approach to, allowing veterans to use cannabis, and especially in medical legal states. So, yeah, it's a really important issue. Veterans should have safe access to cannabis without, putting themselves at legal risk.
Agreed. Eventually, it will be legalized federally.
Yeah, eventually, for better or for worse. Huh?
Yeah. Are you a fan of music? I would think it's safe to say you are.
Yeah, big time. I was a music journalist for the first chunk of my writing career, and then I realized that, as Frank Zappa very smartly put it, writing about music is like dancing about architecture, right? And it is like I really do love music. I mean, I grew up on pop radio in Thailand, but then also my brother is a big music fan and a musician. We played in many different bands over the years. We've both like been musicians since we were kids. I mean, he like played guitar and then taught me to play the drums, when I was like 8. So, and he really facilitated all the grunge music, Seattle grunge music that we were getting in the 90s. And then also hip hop. It was like through him, and he got a cassette tape from someone else, and we heard Biggie and Tupac and Warren G and stuff for the first time. And then when we came to America, it really blew open. And I mean, this is all like when we came to the United States, this is, was definitely, we both, I think, really discovered weed in a big way. He had probably smoked some weed in Thailand, I would guess. He was a high school kid when we were still there. But, it definitely, the access was so much more. We were in Thailand without really, like, a lot of access. There was, like, a few CD stores. You go get bootlegs or whatever. But, yeah, we, in the United States, I mean, I would say there's, like, kind of 3 piles of, 3 sort of genre sets that we're really into. Hip hop, like 90s to early 2000s hip hop, like everything from like native tongue stuff all the way to, like Def Jux and the more abstract type of rap music. I rapped for a long time. Me and my brother did, we're in a rap group where he produced, I rapped, and, we had a live band and stuff. So that was like a big part of it for a long time. Definitely rap music, I mean, is still a huge part of my life. That's like what I listen to a lot of the time. And then also on the other end of the spectrum, which is more heady and kind of stony perhaps, but like British electronic music from the 90s, the less accessible, kind of more esoteric stuff, like what's kind of pretentiously referred to as intelligent dance music, sometimes IDM, Aphex Twin, Square Pusher, all that Warp Records stuff, Ninja Tune. So that definitely a big part of our, music collection is dedicated to that. I mean, still to this day, we're big Luke Vibert fans. And that really is probably, broadly my favorite kind of music is 90s electronic music and the stuff that those artists have done since then. And then, of course, like there was what I was covering for Vice. When I first got to Vice, I was covering like electronic music, like sort of basement beat music that was being made all over the world on things like Reason and Ableton Live, and then uploaded to things like Bandcamp and SoundCloud. So yeah, that there was always a lot of music. And then, of course, I was in a punk band called the Kaminas, and it's which is a quote unquote Muslim punk band or South Asian punk band. And weed was a big part of those days too.
Nice. Well, you just gave me a whole lot of new music that I should probably check out. But I guess could you tell me? And this might be too. We may not have enough time for this answer. But sure. How does weed affect music for you?
Yeah, I mean, it makes it definitely more enjoyable to play. I think it makes you take more risks when you're playing, or just jamming. And also, there's this thing of the way that a lot of people make music nowadays is through, like software. And the software is very gamified. If you look at something like Ableton, I used Reason for a long time. I use Ableton now. It is like kind of like you're playing a game. And the same way that, you can get stoned and more engrossed in a game. Now, I'm not a big gamer at all. I don't have a game console. I haven't had one since the PS2, I think. But I'm definitely not a video game person. But I can see how getting stoned and getting engrossed in a video game is like, that's, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's a really great sort of experience, And I feel like, to me, producing music is like playing a video game, but when you're done playing that game, you have a song. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like being stoned. I mean, like, so when I was in college, I made a bunch of mixtapes, mashups. I did a Jimi Hendrix and Wu-Tang mashup, which is still up on my Bandcamp page. It's so funny. I listened to it like not too long ago after a long time. And like, you know, that is like, man, I would just get stoned and cut samples and make beats. And oh man, I loved it. That was my life for a minute. You know, I wanted to be a professional musician. But
yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. It was a good time, but I think I'm better at writing than I was at making music, perhaps.
Well, I later I'll have to ask you what that Bandcamp site is, because I'm now very curious to hear what you were making.
Yeah, it's Blame the Kid at Bandcamp or .bandcamp.com, which was my Blame the Kid. I used the name The Kid or T Kid and like a lot of stuff. It originally was Blame the Kid, but yeah, that's
nice.
It.
All right, let's see. Well, I know your time is limited, so I'm getting rid of some of these questions, but maybe in the future we can do a part 2 and I can get some of these other questions out there. I guess
no
just
problem.
in a general sense, why do you smoke? What's the reason? What makes you decide to do it at a certain time?
Right. These are good questions, Spencer.
Thank you.
They're really good questions. So, why do I smoke? I smoke because I think it enhances my experience of the world. A day when I'm smoking weed is more fun than a day when I'm not smoking weed. And also, it doesn't have the consequences that quote-unquote drugs do, right, in a lot of ways. Now, I've had plenty of times where I just stop smoking weed. I'm traveling for a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks sometimes when I was, like, doing documentary shoots abroad. Like, no weed for that time, and I was fine. I was a little bored, I would say. There's no withdrawal. I think that, you know, and of course, there's no physically addictive qualities to cannabis. You know, it's never killed anyone. I think these are all massive benefits to weed that a lot of people don't realize, or, you know, or don't like have front of mind, is that this is an easy drug to make a habit of. The same way caffeine is a pretty easy drug. In fact, caffeine withdrawal is harder. If you ever see a person who drinks coffee every morning to sort of get going, not have coffee in the morning, oh my God, they're debilitated. Far more than I am without weed. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's, in a nutshell, besides all the things, you know, we talked about, how awesome it is, those are the reasons that I don't not smoke weed, right? Yeah. So that's why I smoke.
Nice. And then the last question that I like to ask people is just, what do you want to say to weed, pot, cannabis, marijuana, whatever you want to call it? And then the other way to think about that question is, if it were going to go away for a while, or if you were never going to see it, what would you want it to know?
Right. Oh, wow. These are good, man. These are good. So what would I want to say to marijuana? And I mean, I think it's the same thing that I would want to say to all of the fruits of nature that I benefit from. Garlic and ginger and cilantro and all the wonderful plants that we're given, that we're gifted truly, that we appreciate too rarely, is just thank you so much. You know, really, it's like my experience of this world is so much better because of you. Thank you so much. And thanks for healing people and for showing people parts of themselves that they might not otherwise see, and for tasting so fucking good. Yeah, and then if I wasn't going to see it for a while, I would say this is going to suck, but you know what? I hope you're going to benefit someone else somewhere, you know, instead of me. You know what I mean? Keep doing your thing.
That's very generous of you. Well, I want to thank you for doing this brief interview. I really, really appreciate your time. And I hope that my audience enjoyed it as well. I hope they all go check out your old Bandcamp. I hope they check out all of the projects that you have worked on and then you are working on, especially Great Moments in Weed History. And so, yeah, thank you, Abdullah. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And if I could I just say something about Great Moments in Weed History? If you could throw that in there, that'd be great.
Please.
So, yeah, check out my podcast, Great Moments in Weed History, which I co-host with David Bienenstock, who's a longtime cannabis journalist, where we go through some of the more fascinating points in the 12,000-year history of human beings and cannabis. We have stories about Fela Kuti. We have stories about Gertrude Stein. We have stories about the Beatles and Bob Dylan, all types of cultural figures. We've got stories about smuggling. We've got a story about Jesus. Yeah, exactly.
Can't forget about Jesus. So thanks again to Abdullah for this interview. Please go ahead and check out his podcast, Great Moments in Weed History. Follow him on Twitter and Instagram. I've put those links in the show notes. Well, hopefully my future self actually did that. So when I hear this later, that will hopefully remind me. If you are feeling risque, go ahead and give this podcast a review, even if you hate it. You can subscribe, share it with others who you think might enjoy it. I also have a Patreon because that's how things are done these days. So if you think this is worthy of getting a little bit of your money every month, it's like one coffee drink a month, then please go do that. I also have a Google Voice number, so if you want to leave me a message, the number is 917-727-5757. That's a lot of sevens. So that should also be in the show notes. In next week's episode, you will be hearing part 1 of my interview with Nick from the podcast Out of Trouble.